On this week's Only in America, back to the wall as President Trump renews his threat to shut down the government over border funding. And senators question the immigration officials in charge of reuniting migrant families.
This policy shows the extremes this administration will go to punish families fleeing horrific gang and sexual violence and seeking refuge in the United States.
What happened when a former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement was confronted with a tape of crying migrant children his agency took from their parents?
What was your reaction?
I didn't hear the tape.
Oh, come on.
I did not hear the tape. I did not hear the tape.
I can't believe that.
I've heard many children cry in my 34 years.
In my conversation with Carlos Menchaca, the first Mexican-American elected to office in New York City, he tells me about his faith in democracy.
One of the things that's forgotten, I think, in so many of these political moments is the power of listening. Going to communities and asking them, what do you need and how do you want to show up? What can government do for you?
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani with Only in America. New York City Councilman Carlos Menchaca became the first Mexican-American elected in the city when he won his Brooklyn seat 5 years ago. Representing the neighborhoods of Sunset Park, Red Hook, and others, many of his constituents are also of Mexican origin in what is now a majority foreign-born district. Community members say they see Menchaca as one of them, the son of Mexican immigrants who was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. He spent his childhood in public housing, lived on food stamps, and, like many of his constituents, didn't speak English for the first years of his life. His popularity in Brooklyn stems from his hands-on presence in the district. But more than that, as he told me, Carlos asks his constituents to put their hands on democracy.
We, in a lot of ways, got to experience something that not a lot of Americans experience living next to a foreign country like Mexico. And so that really did shape a lot of how I think about the world and my impact in my work right now as a council member in New York. You know, the history of my family is a history that I think can only be felt and lived in the border. My father's family, my grandpa, came through the Baracero program at a time when the United States was recruiting Mexicans to come and pick cotton and work on the fields as farmers. And that's how he got his citizenship, my grandfather, through the Baracero program. And my mother's side, my grandmother was a Mexican national, and she lived in Juarez, grew up in Juarez with her husband, my grandfather, and would cross the border multiple times through her life. And what I learned very quickly was that the border was so fluid for our family. And my mom at times would live in Mexico and she would live in the United States. She was born in the United States, but spent a lot of her youth in Mexico. And of course, that's all different now. And my mom would tell me stories about how they would just get these white papers, these like visas that were given at the border as they crossed for the day to buy stuff or, again, to move. And that was the history of my family. Some of my aunts and uncles are Mexican nationals, and depending on when they were born on one side or the other. The other cool thing about the border is that we are a Mexican city. Even the non-Mexicans are Mexican. They speak Spanish, and everyone was Mexican. So it was very homogenous in some ways, and everyone was just celebrating Mexican culture, American culture together in the city.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why El Paso is just one of my favorite places. Just it's the melding of these two incredibly vibrant communities in so many different ways. So, how did you end up in New York?
Well, I came out in high school as gay, and very, very quickly I realized I needed to get out of El Paso. That there was a moment where I kind of felt like I needed to grow, and that was not going to happen in El Paso. The pace of El Paso was also kind of slow, for my liking anyway. And being the first in my family to go to college, I decided to leave. And I picked San Francisco for like no other reason than I thought that's gay Mecca. If I can be gay, I can be gay in San Francisco. So I went to the Jesuit University of San Francisco. They gave me a great package, full paid scholarship, and went to San Francisco in California. So before going to New York, I stopped in San Francisco, and that's when I met the Jesuits, who I didn't even know existed before I got there, and learned about the power of education and social justice and activism all in one, and integrating that into my practice. El Paso taught me a lot about what it was to live in a border, understanding that there was an international border that separated my family from getting resources. So, I grew up in public housing. We grew up with food stamps and government cheese and peanut butter. And we would go across the border and bring those items that we were getting from the government to my other family that wasn't getting it because they were in Mexico. They didn't have access to the things I had access to. And I remember crossing the border often and thinking, what is this border? Why do we have this border? My family has needs over there. They can't get access. And very quickly, I realized how government played a role, both positively and in some cases negatively, to the flow of resources and aid and support for people that I loved. And so that all became more apparent and real when I became educated by the Jesuits in how to fight for justice and people who were marginalized, people that didn't have power and were heard. And I quickly developed that in San Francisco.
The Jesuit community is just incredible. They're remarkable. I think that what they've done around the world, but obviously here in the States is just amazing. So when you were in school, was there a moment or was there a professor or instructor that kind of led you to have that breakthrough moment?
The recruiter in New York saw that I was incredibly comfortable in San Francisco. I was student body president. I had done so much, and I was growing in the local Green Party movement as a young guy in San Francisco. And he said, I think that you could benefit from growing in a bigger pond, and brought me to New York. And this 1-year program, I said I would just go to New York for a year. What a scary place like New York. I would go back to the comfortable California, San Francisco after a year. But what I found immediately as I got into the program and understood how a multi-sector approach really drives public policy, Coro got me into understanding how the unions worked and how media was involved, and government and for-profit and not-for-profits. And for a whole year, I got embedded into how New York shaped its future. And I saw an opportunity there to stay and grow. And I got a job with the Brooklyn Borough President's Office, was one of my internships in the program, and saw Marty Markowitz, a brand in and of itself for the borough, as this really fascinating character that really embodied all of the different neighborhoods in Brooklyn. Anyway, I saw the diversity here that was just unique to New York and fell in love with it, and wanted to continue to work on behalf of the people of Brooklyn at the borough president's office.
Before we get to you making a decision to run for office, I also wanted to ask you about the diversity of Brooklyn, because I was born and raised in California. I moved to Boston in 1998, and so I went from a community that had a lot of Mexicans to Boston that had like 3. Over your time in New York, how have you seen the Mexican community grow? Because back when you first moved to the city, the community wasn't that large, was it?
It was beginning to grow. In 2004, one of the first places that I lived was in East Harlem, and you saw these taquerias pop up on 116th Street, and Taco Mix it was, and they're actually expanding different parts of the city now, but they were around. The Mexican community was growing. The one particular place in Mexico, Puebla, probably has the largest contingency here in New York City, but we were around. And I think what's really interesting to say here is that where you see the Mexican community the most is in businesses, small businesses, food, restaurant, and workers in restaurants. And that was clear. Now we're at a whole different level, and the influx of Mexican communities across the city in every borough is alive and well. But you're right, it was just beginning in 2004 to really show. What you'll see and hear from historians, though, is that the Mexican community has been coming to the East Coast for some time now, but not with a lot of visibility. I think now you see beyond the business a kind of political surge of power for the Mexican community that you hadn't seen before.
You're at the borough president's office working there. What leads you to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to put my name on the ballot?
New York's political fabric is so fascinating, and a lot of it is so territorial. And I didn't really feel like I was able to run for office here because I wasn't born here, and I think that was the sentiment in the past. What changed everything was Superstorm Sandy as it hit New York City. I was working for Christine Quinn, the Speaker of the City Council at the time. I went to Red Hook, the neighborhood directly impacted in my neighborhood, and began to see the power of local organizing and really embedded myself into the community to support and connect the community to resources. And what you saw through Occupy Sandy and the local infrastructure, I saw some really powerful stuff happen. And my job was really just to support and to fuel that organizing. Very quickly, I saw a lack of response from the local council member at that time, Sarah Gonzalez, who just was hit with paralysis. And I think you saw a range of elected officials just not knowing what to do. And really what you do in moments of crisis is hand it over to the community to allow them to lead. And that's what we did. And so I saw a gap in leadership here. And very quickly, the community was so just pissed off that our government officials weren't coming to listen directly to the needs, that it became clear that they wanted someone new. And so the idea grew from just like an idea to a movement. And in months, I think it was maybe 3 months after the storm, I launched the campaign.
Oh, yeah. So give me a little more color on that because, I've talked to across the country a number of folks who've, made a run at what you're trying to do, and they're unable to kind of build beyond that base. So, how did you get beyond the Red Hook base that you had built so quickly?
One of the things that's forgotten, I think, in so many of these political moments is the power of listening and going to communities and asking them, what do you need and how do you want to show up? What can government do for you? I'm gay, I'm Mexican American, I grew up in public housing, I have my own story. They saw an opportunity to bring their story to the table and build a coalition. So I was talking to Orthodox Jewish community leaders and asking them about their needs, and going to the Chinese community with 3 different dialects that are spoken in the neighborhood and asking their leaders, what is it that you are seeing forgotten in this government? And that can quickly transform a relationship from someone that can be top down, from someone that's more grassroots, which is what we presented in my campaign. And quickly the word got out and people were like, let's make this happen.
If you approaching, your first campaign as, the power of listening, is there something there that, you draw from going to a Jesuit college there?
So much of my training, I think about was that Jesuit training. I think to be thoughtful and connected to a sense of purpose and a calling is really about service. And I think the best way you can serve someone is to understand who they are and build a relationship that is rooted in their truth. And I think a lot of the stuff and the activism that we did on campus was about that, starting with the people. And I think that's I saw that so much in the Jesuit priests that taught me that were in their own struggles through their Jesuit history in South America, and bringing even the theater of the oppressed. And Agosto Boal, I graduated with a performing arts degree, and the performing arts degree is called Performing Arts and Social Justice. And so much of what we were doing, it was a brand new curriculum that just got implemented when I got there, but it was about how South America used theater as a way to empower people. And so much of that is building the narrative and stories that people can connect to because it's their stories. And I saw that over and over again, and I'll never forget that. And that happened at USF in the with my Jesuit education, and that continues to be what I do right now is to allow those stories and that narrative to lead the community. It is not my story; this is our story, and that requires moments to sit down and listen and understand.
So you said something I think that's really powerful: a relationship rooted in their truth. How has that translated to, some of the policy initiatives that you've been, working to advance?
The first thing that we did was pass a law that created the identification card called IDNYC. And this is the largest in the country, municipal government issued ID for all New Yorkers. If you can prove your person and your address, you can get a card that is taken by municipal organizations or cultural organizations funded by the city and the NYPD. So if you're walking down the street and in an interaction with NYPD, they can use this ID to give you a summons. Our undocumented community is extremely excited about this because now they can walk around the city with a government-issued ID and not fear any kind of negative interaction with NYPD. This is one of those ideas that had been circulating in the community for a long time that never got the leadership it required to pass a bill and make it law. And so this is an example of what we were doing for a while now is continuing with that thread of community engaged, community led initiatives.
I want to say that the ID card is hands down, I think, one of the most important local policy changes across the country. I just, you can see how it's changed lives. So I just wanted to pipe in with a big thank you there. So now on to the fun stuff, participatory budgeting. Let's really geek out here.
What this does now is allow the community to have a discussion as a whole and say, we have X $1 million to spend. How do we do that together? And it's built this incredible quilt of relationships that had never convened across genders and ages, cultural experiences and language, and brings people into a room to brainstorm together. And 9 months later, projects arise that are eligible, and a project is born. And then the community gets to decide through a voting process that everyone gets a chance to participate in, including now middle school students as young as sixth grade can vote. And here's the power, I think, that's even more exciting is that the voting happens every year. And so people develop these muscles, these civic engagement muscles that they'll never forget. And these young people that I think are probably the most excited of all of them are seeing their voice turns an idea on their head to an organizing opportunity, to a campaign to get their neighbors to help vote in their auditorium improvement, for example, or a new garden in their park. And they see their ideas come to life. That's what we need more and more in this country is young people and the whole community coming together, seeding an idea and making it happen together.
And it's also an element where people have a sense of, okay, this is what government can do for me in my community. Because oftentimes I feel like there's so much distance between what people kind of think it should happen and what actually happens.
I'll say this, it's not about what government can do for me. It's what I can do with government. And it's a different positioning because I really push the community to take responsibility for the future of their neighborhoods. This cannot just be on the backs of one person or one elected official. This is about a community coming together and taking full responsibility. And they have avenues. They have power. Not just in that moment of voting every 4 years, but in the continual showing up with voice and power to shape the future. And when we're thinking about gentrification, when we're thinking about criminal justice reform that needs to happen and comprehensive immigration reform, everyone should feel like they're invited to the table and be an equal partner with government in this.
The name of the podcast is Only in America. So I'd like to request that you finish this sentence. Only in America, ...
Oh, only in America. Can you see communities from all over the world convene and build the future of their neighborhoods, of their state? I think only in America can you see a passion for evolution and democracy that is not weighted by much except the spirit of that human that is present in this conversation. We have so many immigrants who I engage with on a daily basis from all different ages that are just bringing their creativity, their commitment to a better future, and it's sky's the limit.
Councilor Carlos Menchaca, thank you so much for joining. It has been a lot of fun. Thank you. City Councilman Carlos Menchaca represents District 38 in Brooklyn, New York. There's more about Carlos at our website, immigrationforum.org, where you can also subscribe to Only in America.
America. Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only America.
Only in America.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
In order to distract the public from the ongoing crisis of separated families and orphan children along the border, President Trump renewed his threat to shut down the government if he doesn't get his money for the border wall. It is politics at its worst, as the president looks to mobilize his base through the time-tested tactics of fear, of which he has perfected. This, even though many Republicans are openly saying they'd rather kick the can beyond the midterm elections. Here's Majority Leader Mitch McConnell on WHAS radio in Louisville, Kentucky.
Is the funding of the border wall going to wait until after the midterm elections?
Probably. That's something we do have a disagreement on. And
so Homeland Security won't get funded before the midterms?
Probably not. But most of the government will be covered. And then at the end of the year, if we can't reach an agreement on that, we'll do what's called a continuing resolution for that little portion of the government spending that's left unpassed in individual bills.
So you're not worried about a government shutdown before the midterms?
No, that's not going to happen.
So as of this recording, over 700 children remain separated from their families. I broke down the situation in Los Angeles this week on KTLA News.
The parents have been separated into, in essence, 4 categories. The majority of those parents, about 460, have been deported without their children. A number have signed a waiver, or in essence, waiving their rights to be reunited with their families. Another category is under further evaluation. And finally, another category has been deemed ineligible for having some sort of a criminal record. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos, but at the end of the day, 711 children are without their parents.
So step 2 of the process is focused on the 700 children they're considered ineligible to be given back to their parents. It appears that the judge who's presiding over the cases says that the Trump administration has to offer a plan or that they're going to be given one. So what do you think should happen from here?
Well, this is going to be yet another really busy week for Judge Sabra in San Diego, has been the judge looking at this case. He has a number of documents in front of him from last week. I think what will happen is that there will be continued pressure on the administration to reunify these families. I mean, you have to give an incredible amount of credit to the nonprofit NGO community. We've talked to organizations all along the border in Central America, across the country, who are scrambling to reunite these families because, the federal government has completely failed. And I mean, the only thing that the federal government has done is kidnap thousands of kids from their parents.
There are stories of parents signing documents where they agreed to leave their kids behind, and maybe because they're told that will hasten the reunification process. Or what's that all about?
So what has happened is that as the family presents and requests asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border, what was happening is that ICE and CBP would say, okay, I'm going to take your kid, right? Their kid is put into a separate process. The parent then has been given a piece of paper that says, and they're told, if you sign this paper, you will get your kids back, but you'll be deported. In reality, these are low-income, poor people who are illiterate, often in their native language, much less English. They have no access to legal counsel. And at the end of the day, many of them are signing these papers without any idea what the consequences are.
In an effort to investigate what happened along the border, immigration and law enforcement leaders were hauled before a Senate subcommittee to explain the administration's zero-tolerance policy. Here's Democrat Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois.
Someone in this administration has to accept responsibility. We can have border security without bullying. We can be safe without treating toddlers as terrorists.
In the ugliness of this debate, we forget about the children and families who are impacted by this policy. Well, in order to remind us, PBS Frontline aired a documentary in which correspondent Martin Smith sat down with Tom Homan, who was acting director of ICE until just this past June. Smith played for Homan the infamous ProPublica recording of the children being separated from their families.
What do you think?
It tugs at the heartstrings for sure.
How can you not condemn that?
Look, I've seen a lot of terrible things in my 34 years. Well, we have to address the border. I mean,
do you not sympathize with their
absolutely.
situation?
I'm a parent. It's sad, but when the government chooses to enforce the law and they separate the parent that's been prosecuted, just like every U.S. citizen person in this country gets separated when he gets arrested, but people want a different set of rules for an illegal alien.
So we could all use some good news. So let's bring this commentary to a close on a high note. The Detroit Free Press reports that hundreds of new families in Michigan have come forward to care for migrant children separated from their parents. One foster applicant, a mother of three, Randy Freemuth, told the paper that at least the parents would know their kids are with a loving family. In the midst of all the ugliness, it is nice to be reminded that Americans are good people. I'm Ali Noorani. That's it for this week. Thanks, as always, to producers Emily Chow and Regina Medina, executive producer Kathleen Farrell, and the entire staff of the National Immigration Forum. See you next time for Only in America.